Hi everyone, welcome to the first lecture of Marketing Analytics, entitled Perspectives of Marketing for Analytics, Product and Brand Management. Now, for this lecture, we are going to recap some consumer behavior models and role of marketing analytics within those models. We are also going to be looking at what is brand imaging and positioning, as well as how do we measure brand equity. So, the first thing we want to look at is what is consumer behavior? Just a brief reintroduction. This is where we show the consumer's problem. Now, in a consumer behavior, it's basically about looking at what consumers prefer in terms of their goods and services. Sometimes it also indicates their constraints, like for example, their budgets, and also how do they make choices based on those limited resources that they have. It's basically the consumer wants. And what we want to do is to maximize that satisfaction given with a limited budget that the company has. The assumptions is basically based on preferences are complete and consumers can rank and compare all the products so that we know how one brand stacks up against another brand in terms of preference. And preferences are transitive, which means that if I prefer one brand, then I may look at another brand and I might change my answer. The products are desirable. A good is good or value, and more is better. So, in consumer behavior, we show the consumer decision process. So, extended problem solving versus limited problem solving. So, how does marketing tie into each stage of the consumer behavior process, from need recognition to search for information, information processing, pre-purchase alternative evaluation, purchase, and finally post-purchase evaluation? So, if you were to put classifying the stages of the consumer behavior models in terms of some of the model types that we can model in terms of marketing analytics, then you will understand need recognition in terms of discrete binary choices, whether they prefer or not prefer. Search for information, it's kind of like awareness or consideration. They process their information, and this is where they have the alternatives and they find what kind of products are appealing to them. And before they do that, they look at pre-purchase alternative evaluation, which is where they look into alternative models and touch points of attitude models. So kind of like conjoint analysis of a particular product or service that appeals to them, or the features and the products that appeals to them. Then finally they make their purchase, again whether they purchase or not. And also the post-purchase evaluation, this is where we can look into a regression model to gauge their satisfaction. Now, marketing analytics basically provides management with the knowledge what they need, or management of the knowledge that they need to identify and resolve marketing issues. Now, this could be identifying and defining marketing opportunities and problems, generate and refining evaluation marketing actions, as well as monitoring marketing performances. Okay, it can also be improving understanding of marketing as a promotion. So where does market analytics sit? Well, at the top of it, of course, we need to look at the consumer. But at the bottom of it, these are where we have to bring in the solutions so that we appeal to the consumer. And that's where you see the product launches, the segmentation, the new product design, development, the price, the promotion, the sales, the distribution, the brand health, the brand equity. And all these needs to be tracked underneath a platform of media tracking, web analytics, retail, social media, consumer panels, consumer analytics, quantitative and qualitative research. So before we move on, let's think about what is brand. So a brand is basically a trademark in which in the mind of the consumers, they embrace a particular set of values and attributes. Now, these can be both tangible and intangible. A brand is a consumer idea of a product. This is what David Ogilvy always mentions. It embodies two important principles: that a brand is different from a product and that the difference resides in the minds of the consumers. So if you want to look at this brand, so a brand image is kind of like the consumer's perception of the brand. And the product delivers a set of benefits. For example, it could be functional benefits, rational benefits, emotional connection, personality, brand consumer relationship benefits, and so on and so forth. And the image or the profile of the brand relates to how it is rated on these benefits and attributes. So it's kind of like I give you um, a brand, and then I give you the features of the brand, or I give you the understanding or the perception of what the brand stands for, and you as the consumer would rate it accordingly on a scale. So how do we then position a brand? Now, crafting a brand image is important. Let's say, for example, like this ad here. Incredible India ad campaigns positioning India as a colorful, fascinating country full of tradition and history. It creates a distinct impression in the people's minds about the country as being very colorful and very vibrant. So this ad gives you that kind of feeling. And when we want to position, we must always make sure that we differentiate ourselves in terms of position in comparison with the competitors. Positioning is what you would do to the mind of the prospect. So you have to make sure how you position your brand in terms of in the mind of the consumers so that they will be most appeal to buying that brand. Whereas differentiation is the process of distinguishing the product or an offering from others to make it more attractive to a particular target market, especially if there are many other competitors around. So positioning is the act of crafting a distinct and valued image of the product in the minds of the consumers. So for example, if you look at some of this positioning of some very famous brands, Volkswagen's Beetle talk about things small. So that's how they position that small is always better. Volvo always pride on their safety, whereas BMW is always about the ultimate diving machine. Apple has their logo or their what do you call this motto about things different. Coca-Cola has the same motto on theirs about the real thing. Red Bull is always positioned as an energy drink. You drink Red Bull, you get a lot of energy. And Avis always says we try better. Dove, on the other hand, is about beauty without artifice, which means they want to portray the real beauty of women and anybody who uses. So if you think about brand image, then we need to think about how we track the profiling of this brand image. So the objective here is to measure the consumer's perception of the brands through its association with the relevant attributes that's associated with the brand. Sometimes we have to use quantitative studies where the respondents are asked to rate brands on a wide variety of battery of attributes. It could be how does the brand make you feel, or how does the brand is perceived as well. And we use what we call a Likert scale to do the rating. Yeah, it could be a 5-point, 7-point, or even a 10-point agree to disagree rating scale. So an example would be something like this, where we rate the following brand of shampoo on statements and then 1 to 5. So it could be using brand, the name of Dove, for example, like in this shampoo, makes my hair shiny and lustrous. Dove makes my hair beautiful. Dove prevents dandruff, and so on and so forth. So it could be a lot of statements. Now, if we just take the first top two, agree, number 5, and disagree ratings for a shampoo or brands of whatever study that we are looking at, then we can see that 36% of the respondents, if you see here, yeah, 36% of the respondents either agree or strongly agree with the statement that the brand Pantene makes hair soft. Next, what we need to do is to get the expected rating so that we can get an image profiling. Now, how we do this is by taking the columns of the average, sorry, this 14 here, times the average of the row, the column and the row, and we divide it over the total average. And that's where we will get the expected rating for each of the points. So if you're taking about 35, for example, okay? So then we have what we call an expected image profiling. So in image profiling, it's kind of like an expected thing. So we get the average brand rating and the average attribute rating. So it's the average brand rating and the average attribute rating. And we times it together and we divide it over the average of all the ratings. And that's where we get our image profile, right? So basically, this is a technique that transforms the image rating data to reveal the relative strengths and the weaknesses of the brand. Now, why is this very important? So once we get the expected value out, we can now do the profile rating. And the profile rating is just basically taking the difference, the expected rating minus the actual rating. So the profile rating provides very useful understanding of the relative strengths and weaknesses of a brand's image across the attributes. This is particularly useful when we are looking at the context of the brand positioning and advertising. So for example, if you look at this particular one here, we can see that the data tells us that organics, the brand organics, is perceived to be strong on the attributes that it strengthens the hair, here 26, as well as nourishing the roots. And it's relatively weak in terms of nourishing roots and in terms of frequent use. Okay, so it is also strong on life, body, and bounce. Now, this is where you get the negatives and the positives. Remember about the expected ratings. Now, this is how we understand about what attributes a particular brand is strong and what particular attributes that a brand is weak. So, if we were to put all that into what we call a perceptual map, so consider the bubbles. Suppose that we want to organize them in a very meaningful way. So these bubbles here is very messy. There are probably into 2 dimensions. Do we want to rearrange them in terms of their shades, or do we want to rearrange them in terms of their color? But we want to provide a visual summary of the brand and attitude of the data. So probably we might arrange them both in shapes and shades as well. Though the brands have many attributes, and these can be mapped onto 2, 3, or more factors. So this is like a combination of those attributes. Okay, so now I'm going to explain to you a little bit about what we see on a perceptual map. Now you see that on a perceptual map, you will get the distances between the products. Let's say Vidal Sassoon and Elsif. Okay, the closer they are means that they are more similar. The further they are means they are very different. Now the lines indicate the direction in which the attribute increases while moving away from the origin of that line. So for example, if let's say Vidal Sassoon is very near to Hair Expert and Hair Expert is very far away from this origin point here, means that Vidal Sassoon claims to be a stronger advocate of Hair Expert. And this is what we mean by the greater attribute importance in terms of dividing all the different brands. Now, if we have an imaginary perpendicular line from the product strength, so for example, if I were to take Vidal Sassoon towards Hair Expert, and of course you can see Vidal Sassoon is very near to the perpendicular line of Hair Expert, then it shows that the attribute strength is of a brand position is very strong, right? The closer it is together, then it's very strong. But the further an offering away from the origin, okay, means that the the brand itself is not known for any strength that differs itself from any other brand. So this is how you see a perceptual map. Now, if we were to produce a perceptual map, as I mentioned to you just now, we have got the actual rating, the expected scores, and also the profile differences. Now, what we can do is calculate what we call as the chi-square. Now, the chi-square is just basically the standardized difference across the cells. So, if you were to take the profiles, which is the differences, these profiles we um, square it and then we divide it over the expected score and we will get the chi-square scores. Then each of the chi-square scores we compute the similarity by applying the signs of the profile to the chi-square value. So for example, if let's say this profile on strengthens hair in Pantene is a negative, once we calculate the chi-square of Pantene at 0.8, we just have to put the same sign on the Pantene similarity and 0.8. Now, if you were to put a 0.8 there, you notice that in terms of strengthened hair, the correspondent analysis, or we call it the perceptual mapping, it's right below the origin and it is there in terms of the strengthened hair below the strengthened hair origin, right? So that's where you see Pantene is in terms of creating the correspondent analysis. But of course, we use SPSS to help us to create this. But you just need to understand how the data is actually used to create this perceptual mapping. Okay, so if we want to look at the interpretation here in terms of the perceptual mapping of the brand equity of all these brands, then we can see that shiny, lustrous, soft, beautiful hair are all generic in nature. Why? Because they're very, very near the origin. Whereas attributes like hair expert, strengthened hair, preventing dandruff, frequent use, and value for money, they are all very far apart from the origin, which makes them these attributes very stand out in terms of differentiating the brands. Now, Pantene is very centrally located and is appropriate position for a market leader because it covers a lot of all these things, but it doesn't really necessarily differentiate itself from all the other brands. Whereas on the other hand, a central position is undesirable. Yeah, for example, like a small brand like Optima, a small brand, a niche player. If you want to be a niche player like Vidal Sassoon or LC, should be as far away from the origin as possible and as close as possible to one of the very significant brand attribute. So like J&J, Timothy, and Sifone and Rejoice compete in the same place. You notice that all these here, they all compete in the same place. So which means that there is not enough of differentiation of these brands. Whereas organics is very, very far apart. Vidal Sassoon is also very, very far apart. So this is how you look at the perceptual mapping and how you position your brand in the minds of the consumers and how they perceive in the minds of the consumers. Now, taking the next step, that was just looking at the quantitative side of brand equity. But what about the qualitative side of brand management? See, the qualitative side of brand management is to really extract what the value of the brand is in the mind of the consumers. And this is how you need to manage the brand's health on a constant basis based on the brand equity. Now, a brand equity is the incremental value that the brand values and derives from the thoughts and the feelings that evokes. So it's very, very qualitative in nature. So for example, it could be the persona, the awareness, the news that they hear about the brand, the benefits of the relevance, and of course the image, the symbols, and the emotions. Maybe it could be popular, fashionable, or even prestigious. Yeah, and some other brand attributes could be in terms of, let's say, for example, personal care, right? Their feelings, right? That they feel beautiful, or ingredients which are healthy, family which are down to earth, good value for money, things that are important to them, your consumers, moisturizing, leather, fragrance. So under each of these main attributes, there are also the sub attributes which you have to also take into consideration. Okay. Now, brand equity could also be in form of colors, for example, like the colors that they exuberate. So each of the brands that we know that have a symbolic color also gives out a very symbolic meaning. So for example, like KFC, Coca-Cola, and CNN and Target, they are predominantly red color, and it gives them an ideal of bold, courageous, energetic, and creates a sense of urgency, stimulates your heart rate, and so on and so forth. Okay, whereas if things like blue color will have stability, trustworthiness. That's why you notice that Volkswagen car, are trustworthy, confidence, safety, GE, PayPal, and so on and so forth. All right. So you might want to think about color as also a brand equity measurement. So what is the benefits of brand equity? Um, See, if you have a very distinct brand equity, then you can use it to charge a premium price. It kind of helps you to trade cooperation with other brands as well, and it will help you to think about a longer brand extension that you could use. And if, let's say, your brand is very, very strong in its nature, then you can also start to think about the brand licensing to make sure there is a clear communication message and to give you profitability and loyalty at the same time. So how do we model brand equity? So brand equity is how we compare one brand with other brands and how that comparison has changed over time. The interaction is basically how strong is the brand in the minds of the consumers. So I mean, what does the brand's ability to retain the consumers along the stage of their decision making? And what are the key drivers of these brand equities? Do they know about the brand? Is the brand real to them in terms of salience? And if the brand is real to them, then what is the relationship that they can forge with the brand in the long term? So, categorizing brands underneath a brand loyalty matrix, I call this. Okay, you can see that there is the behavioral loyalty and then there's the brand loyalty. So there are four types of brand loyalty matrix, which is tenuous, bonded, reluctant, and attractive. So, for example, if we were to segment, let's say, a a hypermart in Singapore, for example, then we can segment the brand in such a way whereby people who are bonded, so people who are really, really strong core customers, right? Bonded. People who are potentially gain, that means they see the brand and then they are attracted to it. Then there is also the people who are tenuous, people who are already in that brand, but then they feel that the services that they're getting is not really up to their standard, and that's why we call them the potential loss. And of course, we also have those who are non-considerates. Now, if you're doing something in politics, this is actually a very good way of seeing what kind of people are actually voting for you and attracted to you, but at the same time, those people who are about to leave you. Okay. Then forward, what we are trying to do is to not worry about those people who are non-considerous, nor those people who are already strong supporters, because you know that these are the people that are already going to be with you. Okay, so the two people that we need to try and put in more effort is actually the attracted and the tenuous. Now, why the attracted? Because they know that these people, the attracted people, they are already attracted to your brand. How do we get them to come in and create a stronger relationship with you? Okay. And for those who are tenuous, or we like to call them about to change, or in marketing terms, we call churn, how are we going to defend against them moving away? So that's where we need to put our effort on these two very important groups of people, right? Next, what I want to show you is some of the segment strategies of those four segments, okay? So if you're looking at the reluctance, okay, ask them questions like, why are they reluctant? What is undermining their attraction? If those who are tenuous, that means those people who are about to leave us, our strategy should be about retention. What is undermining equity? That means what is in their minds that makes their perception of us very, very low. So how do we preclude the defection? That means how do we stop them from leaving our brand? Then there is also the attracted, the acquisition. So our main target is how do we acquire them? What are some of the hot buttons that need to be pressed in order to get them in? So what are their pleasure points? Can we increase those pleasure points? Under the 10 years, we can also think about how do we decrease the pain points of those people. And then for those who are bonded, these are our loyal customers. Now, to make them our mouthpiece, we must also think about how are we going to reinforce, reward, and retain them even further, and also get them to do the marketing for us in the long run. So to answer some of these questions, we must first understand what is driving the brand equity. Okay, so some of the simple approaches to measuring the brand equity would be the recommendation. Okay, willingness to recommend. Now, do you remember we talked about just now those people who are already our strong attributors? Yeah. So we have to find out what is the important thing that's going to help them to recommend to people. Is the number of people willing to recommend our brand minus those who are not willing to recommend. So it's kind of like the net promoter index. Those who are willing to recommend minus the promoters minus the detractors. And then we also need to look at the net advocacy index, which is how many consumers are we going to generate in terms of the media. We can also look at sentiment analysis to find out natural language processing to assess what are the positive and negative reviews and the neutrality of the discussion when it comes to qualitative discussion. Okay, so if we look at a scale of 0 to 10, we know that 0 to 6 are mostly the detractors, 7 and 8 are somewhere along the midline, and of course those who are 9 to 10 are definitely those who are going to promote your brand for you. Okay, so if we put everything on a what we call a loyalty pyramid, um, if let's say we were to ask people who are aware of our stuff or our brand, then we notice that they are the aware, the TOM, the top of mind awareness, the trialist, that means people who have used it. We would also think about those who are considered. Then we can move them up into the current, most frequent, and finally become brand loyalty segments, which are people who are going to be recommenders and preferers. Okay, recommenders should increase as many points as possible over a period. So this is how we track those people's relationship along the brand equity, right? But the important thing is achieve the presence at the bottom so that we can move people up across up the pyramid, loyalty pyramid, all right? So we start out by achieving our presence, then providing the relevance to the needs of the customers. Then we ensure that once they are in, we ensure the performance. This is what we call the strategy. And finally, locking them in terms of loyalty. So this is how the salience of the brand becomes stronger and stronger and stronger until it becomes an emotional loyalty and the connectedness of the brand with the consumers, right? So how does the consumers engage with the brand determines how much equity exists. Now, In essence, the higher they go in terms of the pyramid loyalty, then the more engaged they are and the stronger your brand equity is, right? Because what's in their head determines what drives the equity. And this is not just about awareness. You need to also get them to be considerate users, trials, and as well as emotional preferences, right? So at the end of it, I just want to share with you some key takeaways from this particular first lecture. Marketing analytics puts the consumer behavior into perspective. Now we understand that consumer behavior is just not about understanding the psychology of it, but there is a way that we can measure it. You have to then understand that brand image is also about understanding its position and use the brand equity stages of relationship between the customer and the needs and make sure that these are always constantly measured. In the next For this lecture's tutorial, I would like you to read the article about the state of marketing analytics in research and practice. And I want you to answer and consider two very important questions. Identify some of the underutilized potential of marketing analytics in certain companies that you might know today, as well as how can marketing analytics be further used to create stronger brand equity in the minds of the consumers, right? And in the next lecture, we are going to consider from moving from a product and brand to now focus more on the consumer. And we're going to look into customer satisfaction and value, thinking about how we use marketing analytics to view consumer retention and attrition, customer satisfaction, loyalty, and customer value. So see you in the next lecture, and thank you.